My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I found out my husband signed the house I paid for over the last 15 years to his mother. His exact words were, because she's family, and family takes care of family. I stood in our kitchen holding the mail, one hand on the granite counter I'd chosen myself, and I didn't say a word. I just looked at the paper in my hand and felt the floor tilt a little, the way it does right before you understand something you can't take back. There was no fight that night, no yelling. I set the letter down on the counter, walked upstairs, and sat on the edge of our bed for a long time, listening to him load the dishwasher like it was any other Tuesday. What he didn't understand yet, what would take him almost 2 months to understand, was that a house isn't just a deed. It's 15 years of mortgage payments pulled straight from my paycheck. It's every weekend I spent scraping old paint off the porch rails myself because we couldn't afford a contractor back then. And what he did with that house and what his mother did after is the part I need you to hear. Welcome back to the channel, where quiet women stop carrying everyone else's weight and families learn what silence really costs. If you've ever paid for something with your own 2 hands and watched somebody else get handed the keys, this story is yours. Drop a comment and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this one ends. Let me take you back to before the letter. My name wasn't always Whitfield. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of town where everyone's porch light stays on past 10 and nobody locks their car in the driveway. I met my husband, Ryan, when I was 23, waiting tables at a diner off Route 4 while I finished my accounting degree at night. He was quiet in a way that felt safe back then. Steady hands, steady voice. The kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee after only asking once. We got married when I was 25. 2 years later, we found the house. A small brick 2-story on Maple Crest Lane. Nothing fancy, but it had good bones and a yard big enough for the garden I'd always wanted. Ryan worked in equipment sales, commission-based, unpredictable. Some months he brought home plenty. Other months, nothing at all. I worked steady. First as a bookkeeper, then, by 29, as a senior accountant at a manufacturing firm downtown. The mortgage came out of my account every month for 15 years. Not ours, mine. I want to say that clearly because it matters later. Ryan's mother, Carol, never liked me much, not in any loud way, just small things. The way she'd correct how I loaded her son's plate at Thanksgiving. The way she'd say, Ryan's always had such good instincts, like the house, the marriage, the whole life we'd built together had been entirely his doing. I let it go for years. I told myself family is family, and you make peace where you can. I had no idea how far that peace would eventually cost me. Carol had been living alone since Ryan's father passed in 2019 in a rental apartment across town that she complained about constantly. The noise from the parking lot, the thin walls, the landlord who never fixed anything on time. Ryan would visit her every Sunday, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting with her for an hour while she talked about how different things used to be. I never minded that. I liked that he was a good son. It was one of the things I loved about him. What I didn't know was that those Sunday visits had turned into something else over the past year. Quiet conversations, Carol telling him her lease was ending in the spring and she didn't know where she'd go on her fixed income. Ryan telling her not to worry, that he'd figure something out. He never once mentioned any of this to me. Not over dinner, not in bed at night, not during the long drives we used to take on Saturday mornings just to talk. I found out the way you find out most things you should have been told directly. Sideways, through someone else. It was my sister-in-law, Ryan's cousin's wife, actually. A woman named Denise, who'd always been kinder to me than the rest of that family, who mentioned it first at a birthday dinner in March. So Carol's excited about moving in with you two, she said, reaching for the bread basket like she hadn't just dropped a live wire on the table. I smiled and said something vague, something like, oh, we're still figuring out the details? Because that's what you do when you're blindsided in public. You protect the room instead of yourself. I brought it up with Ryan that night in the car. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and said, I was going to talk to you about it. She just needs somewhere stable for a while. A while. I remember that word specifically because a while turned out to mean nothing close to temporary. I told him I needed to understand what moving in actually meant before I could agree to anything. And he said, of course, we'd talk it through properly. We never did. Not really. Every time I tried to bring it up, there was always a reason to wait. A bad week at his job, his mother's blood pressure acting up, a holiday he didn't want to ruin with tension. Looking back, I think he already knew what he wanted to do, and he was simply waiting for the version of the conversation where I wouldn't have a choice left in it. In April, Carol's lease ended early. Conveniently, I'd later learn, because Ryan had quietly encouraged her landlord to let her out of it 2 months ahead of schedule, promising he'd cover any penalty himself. She moved into our guest room on a Friday with 4 suitcases and a floor lamp she insisted on keeping beside her bed. I told myself it was temporary. I made her feel welcome. I cooked dinner every night that week, cleared out closet space, even drove her to get her mail forwarded. I was, if nothing else, still trying to be the kind of daughter-in-law who did the right thing. What I didn't know yet was that somewhere between that Friday and the letter I'd find in June, Ryan had already made an appointment with a real estate attorney, not to add Carol to the deed, not to give her a room, to sign the entire house over to her free and clear, with my name quietly removed from the title in the same afternoon. The letter came on a Tuesday in June, tucked between a electric bill and a grocery store flyer, the kind of ordinary mail pile you don't even look at closely until something inside it catches your eye. It was from the county recorder's office. A notice confirming the transfer of property title for 214 Maple Crest Lane. New sole owner, Carol Whitfield. I read it standing at the kitchen counter, and I read it again because the first time my brain simply refused to process it. 15 years of mortgage payments, 15 years of my paycheck, my name on the loan documents, my signature on every refinance we'd ever done. And somehow, on a Thursday afternoon, while I was at work reconciling quarterly reports, Ryan had walked into an attorney's office and signed it away. When he came home that evening, I set the letter on the counter between us and asked him, as calmly as I could manage, to explain what I was looking at. He didn't deny it. That was almost worse than if he had. He just sighed, like I was the one being difficult, and said, "Claire, she's my mother. She's family. She needed somewhere permanent, not something that could get pulled out from under her again." I did what felt right. I asked him the only question that actually mattered. "And what about me? 15 years of my money went into that house. Did that not feel right to mention?" He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said the sentence I don't think I'll ever fully stop hearing. "You'll always have a place there too, Claire. Nothing has to change for you. I just needed her name on it so she'd finally feel secure. Nothing has to change for me." As if my name disappearing from a house I had paid for, brick by brick, mortgage payment by mortgage payment, was a small technicality and not the entire foundation of the life I thought we were building together. I didn't yell. I want that on record because Ryan's version of this story, when he eventually told it to his mother, made it sound like I'd stormed through the house breaking things. There was no storm. I stood very still, and I asked him one more question, the only one I truly needed answered. "Did you ever plan on telling me before it was already done?" He didn't answer that one. He just looked at the floor, and that silence told me everything the deed transfer already had. I didn't sleep in our bedroom that night. I packed an overnight bag, drove to my sister's apartment across town, and sat on her couch until almost 2 in the morning. Not crying, just turning the whole thing over in my mind like a stone I couldn't put down. My sister, Megan, made tea. Neither of us drank, and finally said the thing I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. "Claire, you do know you can undo this, right? You paid for that house. There has to be a record of that somewhere." She was right, and somewhere underneath the shock, I already knew it too. I had 15 years of bank statements, 15 years of my name on that mortgage, 15 years of proof that the house on Maple Crest Lane had never really been a gift Ryan was free to give away. What I didn't have yet was a plan, but sitting on my sister's couch at 2 in the morning, staring at a lukewarm cup of tea, I could feel one starting to take shape. The first thing I did 3 days later was call an attorney, not Ryan's family friend who'd handled the transfer, but my own. A woman named Patricia Reyes who'd helped a coworker of mine through a messy property dispute the year before. I sat across from her with a folder of 15 years of bank statements, mortgage documents, and refinance paperwork, and I watched her expression shift from polite professionalism to genuine interest as she flipped through it page by page. "Claire," she said finally, closing the folder, "this is one of the cleanest paper trails I've seen. Every payment on that mortgage came directly from your personal account. Your name was on the original loan, even if your husband's name was also on the deed, transferring sole ownership to a third party without your consent. On a property where you hold this much documented financial interest is not as settled as he seems to think it is." I didn't want revenge. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to tell this story like some kind of triumphant takedown, and that was never what I was after. I wanted what was fair. I wanted the truth of who had actually built that house to matter more than who had charmed a room into feeling sorry for them. Patricia filed the paperwork within the month, a formal claim against the transfer based on my documented financial contribution and lack of consent. Ryan called me almost daily during those weeks, his voice cycling between wounded and reasonable, always landing on some version of, "I never meant to hurt you, Claire. I just thought family should take care of family." I stopped explaining myself to him. I let the paperwork speak instead. Carol, for her part, avoided me entirely, communicating only through Ryan, which told me more about her understanding of what she'd accepted than any conversation could have. She'd taken a house she knew on some level she hadn't earned, and she'd taken it quietly without ever once asking me how I felt about giving up the home I'd worked 15 years to keep. The case never made it to a courtroom. 2 months in, Ryan's own attorney advised him quietly that the documentation I'd provided made the original transfer nearly impossible to defend. Rather than fight a battle he was likely to lose publicly, Ryan agreed to a settlement. The house would be sold, the proceeds split according to our actual financial contributions, which meant the overwhelming majority came back to me. Carol would need to find another place to live, this time without a permanent deed attached to someone else's 15 years of work. I moved into a smaller house on the other side of town that November, one I bought entirely on my own, with a small garden out front that I planted myself the following spring. Ryan and I finalized our divorce quietly, without the drama his family had clearly expected from me. I never once raised my voice through any of it, and I think that unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. Ryan still calls sometimes, mostly around the holidays, always circling back to some version of, I just wanted my mother to feel secure. I've stopped needing him to understand what he took from me. What I've learned, sitting in my own kitchen now, in my own house, with my name and only my name on the deed, is that security you build with your own hands can never really be signed away by someone else's signature. It can only be reclaimed quietly in daylight, one honest step at a time.